Welcome back to Field Notes from the Oversoul. In the last episode, we talked about integration. Integration is what happens after collapse, when the nervous system begins to stabilize again. It's the phase where the body slowly learns that it doesn't have to brace for the next impact. You may remember the signs we talked about. You become less reactive. You settle more quickly when something activates you. Your breathing becomes deeper and easier. And something very important begins to happen. Your body starts to trust the present moment again. That trust creates space. Not dramatic space, quiet space. And when that space appears, a new question often arises. It's not the old survival question, what needs to be handled right now? It's a different question, a quieter one. What genuinely interests me? That question doesn't usually appear when the nervous system is under constant pressure. It appears when the body finally has room to notice what actually draws its attention. And that is where today's conversation begins. This is episode 5 of Field Notes from the Oversoul. The title of this episode is Purpose Without Pressure, When Direction Emerges from Regulation. Many people believe that purpose is something you have to chase, something you have to figure out, something you have to decide. But what I've discovered through this process is something very different. Purpose often appears after the nervous system stabilizes, not before. When the body is in survival mode, it's very difficult to recognize genuine direction. All of your energy goes toward managing the present moment, handling the next task, solving the next problem. But when the nervous system begins to regulate, something changes. The constant urgency begins to soften. Your breathing deepens. Your attention widens. And suddenly you have room to notice something new. Curiosity, small interests, things that quietly draw your attention. These signals are easy to overlook, but they are often the earliest signs of direction. Today we're going to explore how that happens. We'll talk about the difference between survival rules and genuine direction, how curiosity begins to return after integration, a past life example of confusing usefulness with purpose, and how purpose begins to appear naturally when pressure disappears. Before we begin, let's take one breath together. Inhale slowly. Hold it. And exhale a little longer than the inhale. That longer exhale tells the nervous system something important. You don't have to rush this process. Direction does not appear through pressure. It appears through steadiness. And that steadiness begins with breath. Integration creates space. When integration stabilizes, the nervous system stops scanning constantly for danger. The body does not need to prepare for impact every moment. That creates space. The first signs are subtle. Your breathing becomes deeper. You recover more quickly when something stressful happens. You begin noticing things you previously overlooked. And inside that space, curiosity begins to appear. Not as a command, not as a decision, just a quiet pull of attention. Before integration, many of us organize our lives around survival roles. These roles often develop because they helped us function in stressful environments earlier in life. Common survival roles include the responsible one, the problem solver, the calm one in a crisis, the one who keeps everything running. These roles are not wrong. In fact, they're often valuable, but they're usually driven by pressure. The question behind them is often, what needs to be handled? Direction comes from a different place. Direction begins with curiosity, with the question, what genuinely interests me? For most of my adult life, my nervous system was trained for crisis. I spent 27 years as a 911 dispatcher. If you've never sat in that chair, it's difficult to describe how much attention the job requires. Every call is different. It might be a routine question, or it might be someone experiencing the worst moment of their life. You learn to listen carefully. You listen for changes in tone. You notice when someone's breathing shifts. You pay attention to the smallest pieces of information. And you learn how to stay steady while someone else is overwhelmed. That was the job. But over time, that way of operating became normal for my body. It didn't turn off when I left work. My mind was used to anticipating what might happen next. If a situation felt tense, I would instinctively try to smooth it. If someone seemed upset, I felt responsible for helping the moment settle. If something felt uncertain, my attention sharpened and my body prepared to respond. At the time, I didn't think of that as stress. When I was at a doctor's appointment, the doctor asked me if I was stressed, and I said no. And I honestly believed that. What I see now is that it had become my baseline. I was so used to existing in a state of stress that I didn't even notice it anymore. It had become normal. I thought of it as responsibility, being dependable, being steady, being the person who could handle difficult situations. And for many years, that identity worked. It made me good at my job. It made people trust me. But eventually, the body begins asking for a different rhythm. When integration began, the first thing I noticed was my breathing. For a long time, my breathing had been shallow without me realizing it. Not dramatic, just slightly tight, slightly held. The kind of breathing that stays ready. Then gradually something shifted. Without trying, my body began taking deeper breaths. Sometimes I would suddenly notice a full inhale happening on its own. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like every cell in my body was breathing instead of just a corner of one lung. Almost like my body was remembering something it had forgotten. I also noticed changes in small, everyday moments. For example, if a conversation became uncertain, I didn't immediately step in to manage it. In the past, I might have clarified something, redirected the conversation, or tried to smooth the moment. But sometimes now I simply let the conversation unfold, and the room found its own balance. Another moment happened during a meeting after I had transitioned into healthcare work. In the past, if there was silence in a discussion, I often failed it. I would summarize something, offer a solution, or move the conversation forward. But one day I noticed myself sitting quietly instead. No urgency to manage the pause. Someone else spoke, then another person. The conversation continued naturally. It was a small moment, but internally, it felt significant. Because for many years, my nervous system believed that if I didn't step in, something might go wrong. That moment showed me something different. The world did not depend on my constant intervention. When that realization began settling in my body, something else appeared. Space. And inside that space, curiosity began returning. At the time, I didn't fully understand what was happening. I wasn't studying nervous system regulation. Instead, I noticed that my oversoul began guiding my attention to the shifts that were occurring. Sometimes it was noticing my breathing change. Sometimes it was recognizing that my body no longer felt the same urgency to manage situations. There was a quiet sense of being shown what was happening from within, not through analysis, through awareness. And over time, that awareness began forming understanding. And that difference matters, because purpose does not come from pressure. It begins to appear when the nervous system finally has enough space to notice what genuinely interests you. I remember another life. It was not dramatic or legendary. It was ordinary. I was a man who kept records in a small town along a trade road. Travelers passed through regularly with carts and animals. Merchants carried cloth, grains, and tools between villages. My work was simple, but it mattered. I kept the ledgers. Land agreements, debts between merchants, marriage contracts, tax records. Everything was written by hand. Ink, sand to dry the page, stacked parchment. The room where I worked smelled like paper, dust, and oil lamps. Accuracy mattered. If a number was wrong, a family might lose land. If a name was missing, a debt could not be proven. People trusted the records because they trusted me. They would say things like, "He never makes mistakes. If he writes it down, it is settled." Reliability became my reputation, and slowly, it became my identity. I arrived before the doors opened. I stayed after everyone left. If someone needed a document copied, I did it. If two merchants argued over a number, I stayed until it was resolved. The work was steady. The town respected me. But over time, something else began to happen. My days were full of responsibility, but very little curiosity. Everything I did was useful, but usefulness quietly replaced choice. I didn't ask what interested me. I asked what needed to be done. That question shaped my life, and for a long time it worked. People trusted me. The town depended on me. But there was a cost. My shoulders were always tight. My breathing became shallow from long hours bent over the desk. And my life slowly narrowed to the space between those ledger pages. There was a moment near the end of that life when something became clear. The ledgers were balanced, the records were correct, the town was functioning. But sitting there in that room, I realized something I had never asked before. Not what still needs to be done, but something different, something unfamiliar. Question was, what genuinely interests me? And the realization was quiet, but unmistakable. I didn't know the answer, because I had spent most of my life being reliable. I hadn't spent much of it exploring what actually drew my attention. Usefulness had become the measure of belonging, and I had accepted that equation without questioning it. That unfinished question carried forward. When I look at my life now as Laura, especially the years in dispatch and healthcare, I can feel the echo of that same pattern. Be steady, be dependable, hold things together. Those qualities are valuable, but when they become identity, they can quietly replace direction. Integration in this life has created the opportunity to ask a different question. Not only what needs to be handled, but also what genuinely interests me. That question was unfinished in that earlier life. In this one, it's finally being explored. There are quiet signals that indicate emerging direction. After integration begins to stabilize, direction rarely appears as a dramatic revelation. It doesn't usually arrive as a sudden announcement about what you are meant to do with your life. Instead, it begins quietly. Small signals appear, not instructions, signals. There are 3 signals that often appear first: curiosity, energy, and ease. The first signal is curiosity. Curiosity is often the first sign that direction is beginning to emerge. You may notice your attention returning to certain topics or activities again and again. Not because you need to do them, but because they genuinely interest you. Curiosity feels different from urgency. Urgency says, I should do this. Curiosity says, that's interesting. For example, you might notice yourself lingering over a certain type of conversation. If someone begins talking about a topic that fascinates you, your attention sharpens. You lean in without trying. Or you might notice yourself choosing the same kinds of books, podcasts, or videos repeatedly. Not because they are required, but because something about them holds your attention. You may even notice curiosity in very small ways. For example, you might begin paying attention to how people communicate during stressful moments, or how certain environments affect your mood, or how different types of work feel in your body. In my own life, I began noticing that whenever conversations turned toward how the body processes stress, my attention became very focused. Not because I was trying to solve anything, but because I was genuinely interested in understanding what was happening inside the body, because I'd realized it had been happening inside mine. Curiosity does not push you. It simply points. The second signal is energy. Certain activities leave you feeling more alive instead of depleted. This can be subtle. You might spend an hour helping someone understand something and realize that you feel more energized afterward. Or you might notice that time passes quickly when you're doing a certain type of work. You look up and realize that 2 hours have gone by. Your body feels alert, your mind feels clear. That is different from survival roles. Survival roles often leave the body drained. Even if the work is meaningful, the nervous system stays tense. But activities connected to genuine direction often feel different. They still require effort, but the effort feels sustainable. For example, after long shifts as a dispatcher, I was often physically and mentally exhausted. That was the nature of crisis work. But when I later found myself talking with people about how the body responds to stress and how breathing changes during intense moments, something interesting happened. Even after those conversations, my energy increased instead of decreasing. That was a signal. Energy is one way the nervous system shows you where alignment might be forming. The third signal is ease. Ease doesn't mean something is effortless. It means that a particular activity feels natural to you. You may notice that certain kinds of explanations come easily, or that people often come to you for a particular type of perspective, or that when you begin working on something, the structure forms naturally in your mind. For example, you might find yourself explaining a complex idea to someone and realize that the explanation comes together smoothly. The words arrive easily. You're not forcing the process. In my own experience, I began noticing that when people asked about how to stay calm in difficult situations, the explanations came naturally. That ability had developed over years of working in crisis environments, but also from the growing integration and embodiment of my oversoul, which was giving me understanding that I hadn't had before. But now it was showing up in a different context. Instead of responding to emergencies, I was helping people understand the body's response to stress. That felt natural. That kind of ease is another signal. These three signals work together: curiosity, energy, ease. When these three signals begin appearing around the same types of activities or conversations, they often point toward emerging direction. But it's important to understand something. Direction does not arrive all at once. It becomes clearer over time. You notice a pattern, your attention returns to the same topics, your energy increases during certain types of work, certain conversations or activities feel natural. Over time, those signals begin forming a path, but the path appears gradually, not through pressure, through attention. Because purpose does not begin with force, it begins with noticing. In closing, there is something important I've come to understand through this process. For a long time in my life, usefulness felt like purpose. If I could help, if I could stabilize a difficult moment, if I could keep things running smoothly, then I believed I was doing what I was meant to do. That belief shaped many years of my life. It shaped my work in dispatch. It shaped how I moved through relationships. And when I look back at that earlier life as the record keeper on the trade road, I can see the same pattern there as well. Be reliable, be steady, be the one people can depend on. There's nothing wrong with those qualities. They are valuable. But over time, I began seeing something I hadn't noticed before. Usefulness and purpose are not the same thing. Usefulness often comes from responsibility. Purpose grows from curiosity. Responsibility says, what needs to be handled? Curiosity asks a different question. It asks, what genuinely interests me? For many years, my nervous system did not have space to ask that question. It was focused on managing what was in front of me. But when integration began, something changed. The urgency softened, my breathing deepened, and slowly, space appeared. Inside that space, curiosity began returning. not as pressure, not as command, just small moments of interest. And those small moments matter, because purpose does not usually arrive as a grand declaration. It appears through patterns of curiosity, through energy that increases instead of drains, through activities that feel natural to your system. Over time, those signals begin to form direction, not because you forced it, but because your nervous system finally had the space to notice it. If you are in the integration phase right now, you may feel something similar. You may feel quieter, less urgent, perhaps even uncertain about what comes next. That uncertainty is not failure. It is space. And inside that space, curiosity can begin to appear again. Not all at once, gradually. So if there's one thing I would suggest paying attention to this week, notice what genuinely interests you. Not what you should do, not what other people expect, just what quietly holds your attention. Those small signals often mark the beginning of direction. And direction, when it grows from regulation instead of pressure, tends to be much more sustainable. Before we finish, let's take one breath together. Inhale slowly. Hold. And exhale a little longer than the inhale. That longer exhale reminds the nervous system that it doesn't need to rush. Direction will continue to reveal itself. In the next episode, we're going to talk about what happens when direction begins turning into action. How do you move forward without losing the steadiness you've built? How do you take steps without returning to pressure? That is what we'll explore in episode 6. Until then, stay steady, trust the breath, and remember, you don't have to force purpose. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply notice what genuinely interests you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.